Jordan Peterson's analysis of Islam is really interesting. I want to show you what he has to say and then give you my thoughts from a Jewish position. Have a watch.
So, Dr. Peterson, I have a lot of questions that arise from your comments at the Balfour 100 event, your M103 video, your recent discussion with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and your comments on Islam in the West in general. And in your comments, there's this common theme that one of these things is not like the other. You put the Judeo-Christian tradition on the one side and Islam on the other. Specifically the, quote, complex problem of Islam and the, quote, as a, quote, totalizing system. And before I go further, let me state that if hypothetically a final analysis of Islam resulted in as total a denunciation as your analysis of postmodernism or neo-Marxism, I wouldn't be personally offended at all. This isn't a personal question. In your recent interview with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she said, Western values are superior to Islamic law and Islamic values. I agree with that, basically, certainly in the context of, let's say, current global affairs. I'll skip the quotes from a Reason magazine interview, but you should read them because hers is a worldview which is very much the West versus Islam, not radical Islam, but Islam, including necessarily the military option. So my question is, at the level of psychological significance of these stories, at the level of mythology and archetype, how is Islam so different from the Judeo-Christian tradition? You know, because Adam, Eve, Havva, Satan, Shaitan, so on and so forth, everything from the fall to the flood, a lot of what you discuss in this lecture series is necessarily part of Islam as well. And in fact, I think one of the strongest criticisms of Islam is that it's perhaps pretty unoriginal. You know, tonight you said that the moral presuppositions of a culture are instantiated in its stories. I see a lot of the same stories. So current global affairs aside, I'm asking at the deepest levels, how different are these stories and the moral presuppositions?
Okay, well, that's a killer question. Well, okay, so the first thing I would say is, fundamentally, I don't know. And so part of the reason that one of the things I'm planning to do is to have a series of discussions, and plenty of people have contacted me about discussing with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, because as you know, she has powerful and serious foes. And they're not happy with her black and white distinction. And so, now I read Infidel, and I really liked that book. Like my sense was that she was a heroine. Now, what that means in relationship to Islam, that's a different story, because she came out of a totalitarian, let's say, family structure in a relatively totalitarian society. And you could make the case that there's a correspondence between that and Islam, and you could make the case that there isn't. And of course, that's the critical issue. And so, there's a couple of things that I can't wrap my head around easily in relationship to Islam. And so one is what I see as the failure to separate church from state. And that's a problem. Now, it may not be a problem as such, but it's certainly a problem in relationship to the relation between Islam and the West, because we separate church from state. Now, there's fundamentalists in the United States, Christian fundamentalists, who think that that separation is a mistake. So it's not only an idea that's rooted in Islam that those should be united. But it's definitely a problem with regards to our coexistence, because that's a fundamentally different presumption. Okay, so that's problem number one. Problem number two, for me, and again, this may be a consequence of my ignorance, which I'm trying to rectify, Muhammad was a warlord. And I don't know what to do about that fact. Like, one thing you can say about Christ, hypothetically, let's say, I'm not talking about a historical reality necessarily, although I'm not denying it either, is that of all the things he was, warlord was definitely not one of them. And I don't know what to do about that. And so, I don't know how to reconcile that. And I don't know how to reconcile, like, not only was Muhammad a warlord, which I don't think is an unreasonable thing to proclaim, the expansion that he initiated was unbelievably successful. I mean, within 600 years, it was the biggest empire the world had ever seen. And it demolished Byzantine Christianity, which is something that Western people don't even know. You know, I've read thinkers who said that the West was so traumatized culturally, let's say, by the demolition of Byzantine Christianity, that we can't even study it now. And so, I don't know if that's true, but I don't know that it's not true either. And the Buddhists were wiped out of Afghanistan, and we saw that echoed in the Taliban's destruction of those great Buddhist monuments. And so what I'm hoping is that there's a bridge. There better be a bridge. And that's why I want to have these discussions, because I'd like to understand if there's a bridge. And so lots of people have sent me people who I should talk to, who they think represent Islam far better than Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And perhaps they're correct, and hopefully I'll get an opportunity to talk to them, because I would like to know why. I would like to know if what I think is wrong. Because if it's wrong, it's important that I know it's wrong. But at the moment, I don't know it's wrong, and B, I don't see I'm not sure what it signifies. So, and I don't think anyone is sure, right? Because we have this entangling of the civilizations. You know, and there's other things too, like I'm not very happy with the Saudi Arabs and the Wahhabis. I don't think they're our allies. I don't see how any Western woman can possibly think that they're our allies. And I'm not happy with the fact that the petrodollars that we send them are transformed in substantial part into the kind of propaganda that's definitely a threat to the West. And I'm not very happy with the fact that our politicians appear stupidly blind to that. Now, that may again be a consequence of my ignorance. It's certainly possible. But those are the sorts of things that I can't reconcile. And so, you know, I've also seen parallels between the ideas that I'm presenting here and other religious traditions, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism. It's harder for me to bridge the gap with Islam, and I'm not sure why that is. I think it has something to do with the things that I just laid out. Now, what I don't know about Islam would fill very many volumes, many of which I have sitting on my shelves at home right now because I want to do the reading, you know, as I progress through this. But, yeah.
So, I mean, I am sure why it's harder for him to reconcile Islam, and that's precisely what he said, that it is a deeply political religion that wants political expansion. And so that cannot tolerate other religious dominance, autonomy, anything of the sort. But, you know, I think it would be really interesting for me to share with you a Jewish perspective on this. And actually, I'm going to be going into a lot more detail in a documentary that we're working on right now, which is all about the Judaism's view on Christianity and Islam, and how we understand why God allowed for Christianity and Islam to rise and dominate so much of the world. And one of the reasons is, and as Jordan notes, it was such a remarkable expansion under the first caliphate. One of the reasons is, according to our rabbis and our sages, that Christianity and Islam have spread so much of Torah ideas. The ideas of the Ten Commandments and basic morality, the idea of one God, the idea of a God that we are morally accountable to, the idea that idolatry is wrong, that murder is wrong. Now, of course, they find ways of justifying it for their religious expansion, and etc., etc. But, you know, the world is very different today than it was thousands of years ago as a result of the rise of these two children of Judaism, Christianity and Islam. They're also preparing the world, the sages say, for the notion that there will be an end times moment where the world will transition into the messianic era, in which God becomes ever fully present, known, understood, and the world becomes good and whole, and they've spread that notion so it doesn't come as a shock to the world. Islam and Christianity have spread that notion. But what we'll also touch on in the documentary, and I think kind of Jordan was touching on it a bit here, is where Judaism would say that Islam and Christianity have veered from the original Torah message. And one of those things is that, from a Jewish perspective, we would say Christianity veered too much towards leniency, which created all kinds of problems in the law, and Islam too stringent, too rigid. In Judaism, we say you steal, you have to pay back and face a fine for what you did. In Islam, we're going to chop off your hand. And so there's dangers to both. And our argument is, and my argument in the film is that it's better if we stick to the original. The original divine plan was actually works way better. And this is the thing, that Judaism actually proposes a wonderful balance and synergy. And we, as the people of Israel, can really offer that. Part of something that irks me is when people try to say, Israel and America and the West, we're all fighting the same battle. Israel is at the forefront of Western civilization. Of course, there's a truth to that, but that's never going to resolve the conflict with the Islamic world. Actually, Israel is not meant to be the pin-up boy of Western civilization, even though Western civilization owes much of its values and structure to Judaism, to the Torah. Israel is meant to be the light to the nations and meant to provide that divine path, that middle path, that path that, these other religions and other forces have kind of veered from. And we're meant to provide that answer to how one can serve God in a wholesome, healthy way. Thinking that we just, our answer to the Islamic world's gripe with the West is Western secularism and liberalism, they can see that it's got a certain vacuousness to it. And so Israel actually, far from just trying to say, well, no, we are just another Western outpost, Israel has to be who she's meant to be, and that will actually be the core to solving this conflict. And so, for example, Jordan talks about how in Christianity they have a separation of church and state, whereas in Islam they don't. What's the Jewish view? The Jewish view is actually somewhere in the middle. In the Jewish Hebrew Republic of old, thousands of years ago, what did the Torah create? It created a system where, yes, there was some religious power and leadership involved in the political institutions, but the power was limited. It was subject to the law, so they were also held to the rule of law. The king had to have a Torah scroll with him at all times, but also there was a separation of powers. So actually, the idea of a separation of church and state was inspired by the Hebrew Bible, but some people took it to the point of saying God should be completely removed from our institutions. Whereas Torah said, no, God needs to be in our institutions as well, because otherwise, you need divine Torah morality informing the political leadership and character of a country. But it needs to be controlled, it needs to be limited. And so, you had the king, then you had the judges, and then you had the priests and the prophets, and they all had limited restrictions of their power that didn't overlap. And so Torah is actually somewhere in the middle. And so you find that again and again with Torah. And so we're going to create something on this platform, a documentary. It's already in the works, the editing works right now, and I hope you'll find it really fascinating. But a documentary you can watch right now, which we've just literally released today, and I'm so excited about this one, is something that everyone needs to get clued up on, and it's about Israel. Everyone says that Israel's original sin, not everyone, the anti-Israel activists say that Israel's original sin is the Nakba. They stole Palestinian land in 1948. They committed war crimes, and that's what Free Palestine is all about. Well, we created a new documentary called What Really Happened in 1948. The Truth Behind the Lies. Have a watch of the trailer, and if you want to watch it, just click on the link in the video description. In 1948, the world witnessed the rebirth of the Jewish state, the State of Israel. a moment celebrated as a miracle of survival and self-determination after centuries of persecution and the horrors of the Holocaust. Yet for decades, this event has been twisted into a narrative of theft and catastrophe, with the so-called Nakba portrayed as Israel's original sin, where Jews allegedly stole Arab land and displaced innocents in a premeditated act of ethnic cleansing. But what if this story is fundamentally inverted? What if the cause and effect are the other way around? Not Israel aggressively seizing territory and Arabs responding in self-defense, but Arabs, driven by deep-seated hatred, rejecting the Jews' legal and historical rights to live in their ancestral homeland and waging a genocidal war long before Israel's re-establishment. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to uncover the unvarnished truth about 1948, the centuries of pogroms and anti-Semitic violence that set the stage, the Arab leaders' explicit calls for extermination, and the defensive war Israel fought to secure its existence. We'll challenge the pervasive lies head-on, showing how Arab rejection of peace wasn't about creating a Palestinian state, but about denying Jews the right to live at all. From the Nazi-allied leader of the Arabs in Palestine, the Mufti al-Husseini, to the forgotten occupations by Jordan and Egypt, when no Palestinian state was even considered, this is the story of a conflict rooted not in displacement, but in whether the Jews deserve to live in their homeland. Join us as we debunk the myths with facts, confront the historical record fairly but firmly, and reveal why 1948 was not an act of aggression, but a righteous response to annihilation. This is what really happened in 1948. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.